In response to the overwhelmingly positive reception of my video in which I outline the 10 most egregious examples of Patrick Star being a terrible friend to SpongeBob, I fully intended for my next deep dive to be a video in which I discuss the 10 most heinous actions of a one Eugene Krabs, owner and manager of the Krusty Krab, as well as the exploitative boss of both SpongeBob and Squidward. However, in my venture to narrow down the 10 worst offenses of the cheapskate, I found the act of curating this list simultaneously easier and harder than creating the same type of list for Patrick. It was simpler in the sense that there's just so much more material to choose from, but it was also more difficult because there's just so much more material to choose from. Unlike Patrick, Mr. Krabs does not have a barely double-digit amount of documented instances that perfectly exemplify his questionable morale. He simply is himself the transgression. More often than not, when Mr. Krabs is present, he is doing something that is categorically bad. He is arguably the main antagonist of the series, considering even Plankton himself, it would seem, sometimes opts to uphold certain moral codes that Eugene just does not adhere to. Mr. Krabs almost makes a competitive sport out of things like theft, exploitation, greed, deception, and what's more is he does all of it with a knowing smile on his face. This man is not dumb, and unlike Patrick, he does not play dumb. He knows exactly who he is and what he's about, and he really doesn't even try to hide it. He walks around with a braggadocious confidence, an unwavering sense of superiority that everyone just allows him to carry because he simply provides Bikini Bottom with such an essential cultural cuisine. The more that I pondered the subject, the less I found myself asking exactly what he does, and the more I started asking myself why on earth he decides to do it. Why does Eugene Krabs take such pride in his stubbornly guarded wealth and ability to take advantage of the less fortunate? Well, in order to understand the crustacean, I suppose we have to trace it all back to from whence he originated. Chapter 1. Toxic Crabsculinity. Before we divulge directly into the life and crimes of Eugene himself, it's important that we understand the social structure that sea creatures of his kind inhabit. A very clear dynamic within the cultural landscape of underwater society is the persistence of very rigid stereotypes and expectations of different demographics. For example, sponges tend to be bubbly and nurturing creatures with unshakable optimism. Starfish tend to be slothful and stupid as well as outright vindictive sometimes. Squids are typically narcissistic isolationists with fragile tempers. It seems as though the large majority of folks in Bikini Bottom are fish and thereby are the least susceptible to these types of tropes. Fish are allowed a level of individualism that other creatures are not brought up to embrace at all in the same way. And what's more is that most creatures seem to not only play into their given caricatures, but oftentimes actively embrace them. And in the case of crabs, they may just have the most damaging social quota of all. It would seem that crustaceans are expected to uphold extremely damaging standards of financial stinginess. It's unclear if these stereotypes carry across gender lines, considering the only female crab we've really met is Eugene's mother, who seems relatively ambivalent to many of the things that her son often stresses about. But regardless, the environment that crabs are groomed into from an extremely young age is not just obviously detrimental to their own development, but subsequently detrimental to society at large. Things like piracy and looting are upheld as effectively mandated behaviors among crabs. There's even an annual convention put on by the most elite of avaricious decapods where they collectively circle jerk one another for how excessively greedy they can be. We see numerous crabs compete in an award ceremony by filming and displaying their most diabolical schemes of gaining and or keeping money. From Mr. Krabs' own demand for customers to pay him $1 per step, to other business owners tripling chip prices and reusing toilet paper, a culture of financial manipulation and shameless scheming is evidently seen as not just par for the course, but their actual standard of morality. At one point, Mr. Krabs asks SpongeBob to go on stage and make a speech about how cheap he really is. And when SpongeBob gets anxious, he just starts rattling off a bunch of lies about Eugene being this generous and diplomatic boss. This doesn't just result in Mr. Krabs losing the award, it gets him exiled from the inner crab circle entirely, and he's only redeemed in the eyes of his peers when he's caught attempting to steal an entire hotel room. The idea of a crab being not even philanthropic, but simply a rationally compensatory manager is seen as a violation of the Crab Overton window. Enough of a controversial concept to get you socially blacklisted by your own species. It's unclear exactly who is responsible for this culture, whether greater society pushed their crustaceous ancestors into this type of lifestyle, or if they just came up with it themselves. But regardless, the message is clear. A message that has been hammered into the mind of Eugene Krabs since he was a wee little boy. Your only value is rooted in how much money you can take from others, how much money you can accumulate, how much money you can save, and how much money you can steal. This type of societal pressure would be difficult to overcome in its own right, regardless of his situation. But, alas, for a poverty-born Eugene, it was all the more exacerbated. Chapter 2. The Misfortunate Crab. Born November 30th, 1942, Eugene H. Krabs comes from uncharacteristically humble beginnings. Coming of age in the immediate aftermath of World War II, Eugene was an outcast at school as a young boy due to his very shoddy presentation. His classmates often grew up with an abundance of disposable income due to the bustling economy of the era. But alas, Eugene was not so privileged. He lived in a trailer park with his sister and presumably single mother. It's heavily implied that Eugene was either born out of wedlock or a child of divorce at a very young age. His relationship with his father is never explored much, as Victor Krabs is only ever seen once as a late series cameo. However, he did at the very least have some kind of contact with his son during his youth. This we know from Eugene's personal anecdote about his father giving him $1 at the age of 5, which he regrettably spent on a soda. Not to be confused with the first dollar that he ever earned himself, which is famously hung with pride on his wall in his anchor. But regardless of the extent of Eugene's relationship with his father, either way, it's abundantly clear that it didn't greatly help his overall quality of life. Eugene was still living in poverty as his mother struggled to provide, often sending him to school in literal rags reminiscent of Dolly Parton's coat of many colors. This led to his classmates bullying him profusely, referring to him as Rag Boy, as well as exiling him from social activities. During this time in his life, his only real friend seemed to be a one Sheldon Plankton of later Chum Bucket infamy, a lifelong close friend who would eventually become his arch-nemesis. It's very clear that this friendship meant a lot to Eugene, seeing as even during his adulthood, he expresses sincere interest in fixing the relationship on multiple different occasions throughout the years, each time, unfortunately, to be met with just more conniving deception from Plankton's end. In fact, completely antithetical to the stereotypes imposed upon him by his species, Eugene seemed to have an innate predilection towards generosity as a child, specifically pertaining to Plankton. He sticks up for Plankton against bullies, and when we see Eugene absolutely mesmerized by his first penny that he finds at a carnival, he decides to spend it on a balloon for Plankton, a strong indicator that his future greediness may be a product of nurture rather than nature. It's likely that the loss of this friendship during his adolescent years caused Eugene to intentionally disassociate from his past even further as a young adult. He began attempting to carve out his own path when he decided to join the Navy shortly after graduation. Why exactly they needed underwater Navy, I'm not 100% sure, but nonetheless, he served in an unspecified but clearly extremely affecting war that led him into a deep depression until he was able to open his own restaurant. At some point around this time, Eugene also attempted to follow in his grandfather's footsteps and become a proper pirate. He even managed to assemble a pretty well-endowed crew and stumble upon some actual real material treasure, yet was still unable to turn a decent enough profit to stay afloat. It's unspecified exactly when this all transpired, but it was definitely at some point during his early adulthood while he was still finding his footing. Eugene's humble beginnings are notable not just because they outline his path towards greed, as well as his aversion to spending, but because it shows where he started on the totem pole of Krabs society. Eugene started out in life as an absolute failure, the absolute worst things that a crab could be: poor, vulnerable, and powerless. This relentless ostracization and outcasting from all fronts was deeply damaging to a young Eugene's psyche, and tragically, in predictable fashion, the system would inevitably swallow him and spit out a monster. Chapter 3. The Secret Formula. Eugene's claim to breaking the cycle of poverty came in almost a miraculous form. There was no extensive research done, no hefty fine paid, and no formal education needed. In fact, it really wasn't anything he did himself at all. When Eugene and Plankton joined forces to open their own burger joint, it seemed a lot less like a commercial venture and more so one of popularity. After years of being written off by their peers, Eugene and Sheldon are less eager to simply make money off of them as opposed to impressing them. Shortly after crafting their recipe, the two get into a heated exchange over the formula's intricacies. When Plankton storms off and slams the door, he miraculously manages to knock the exact perfect set of ingredients off of a shelf into the patty batter, and Eugene immediately realizes he hit the lottery. This moment shows the first real shift in Eugene's character. The moment where he stops being Eugene and starts becoming Mr. Krabs. Instead of talking to Plankton or attempting to salvage their friendship, or even showing a modicum of gratefulness towards Plankton's inadvertent creation of his own product, Eugene decides to take the opportunity and run. The next day at school, he gives all of his classmates free samples of his new formula to rave reactions. Immediately, we see Eugene being hailed as a hero and showered with idolatry from his peers, and we see Plankton, likewise, left behind in the rubble, unaware that it was his kinetic energy that made the entire thing possible in the first place until Karen later shows him. It's important to note that at this point, Eugene really hadn't made any sort of actual money from his product, and even after this, he wasn't making a living off of it until deeper into adulthood when he decided to actually open a real restaurant. The birth of the Krabby Patty was never about money to begin with. It was about power. It was about respect, gaining validation from those who once wrote him off as a mere shell of a crab. It really makes you wonder, is Eugene's obsession truly rooted in a simple love for cash flow? Or does the financial makeup merely symbolize the filling of a void that lives much deeper? We flash forward to the present day, and the Krabby Patty is inarguably Bikini Bottom's staple. Sea creatures from all walks of life travel far and wide for a taste of the deeply ingrained culinary richness that is a simple patty enclosed between two white buns, lettuce, tomatoes, onions, cheese, pickles, ketchup, and mustard. It's not just the hottest menu item in town, it is the heart and soul of Eugene Krabs' legacy, the solitary reason for his reputation, his riches, and his relationships. The Krabby Patty is to Mr. Krabs as teenage dream is to Katy Perry, an ever-present deed of proof that his relevance is perpetually earned and unquestionable. With it, he is everything, and without it, he would be nothing. Had he never accidentally conceived the formula on that fateful day, he would likely still be shacked up in that Section 8 housing wearing dumpster fines and splitting rent with his decrepit mother. To lose the Krabby Patty's secret formula would be to lose his identity. And the fear of just that happening is an anxiety he must live with every single day for one persistent, microscopic reason. Chapter 4. The Mirror You Left Behind. Eugene had no idea what monster he created the day he decided to take the money and run. He likely assumed that Plankton would simply hang his head low and take his loss just like any other time he'd been stepped on before. However, as close of friends as he was with Plankton, he strangely must have not known him very well at all, because obviously, Plankton did not decide to merely keel over. He didn't try to mend the fences, and he didn't try to placate or even try to convince Eugene to join forces with him. Plankton decided it was all or nothing. Either the formula was his or it wasn't, and he vowed to spend every waking moment of his life thinking of ways to make it his. From robots to absurd disguises to prematurely perfecting reverse aging, Plankton seems to have a never-ending to-do list of schemes that he probably halfway expects to fail. And what's more is, he really doesn't have to do this. We've quite literally seen Plankton successfully turn the chum bucket into a seemingly profitable gift shop, although this turned out to simply be yet another attempt at nabbing the ever-precious formula. Plankton would likely be mentally and financially better off to just completely abandon his ambitions of taking over the Krabby Patty empire, and yet years after years upon years of failed efforts, he still insists upon it, as if it's his only calling. This eternal war over a simple piece of paper is truly a symbolic fight for something greater, and that is ego. It doesn't matter that Plankton could make more money seeking other ventures. He doesn't want that money. He wants money from what he sees as rightfully his from the recipe that he inadvertently created. To him, profit is a measly benefit of the power that comes with the ownership of the recipe. As much as Mr. Krabs desperately holds on to the secret formula because it builds up his identity, Plankton desperately seeks it out because he views it as his stolen identity. If Plankton were to ever successfully steal the secret formula, Mr. Krabs' entire perception of himself would come crashing down. Mr. Krabs needs to hold on to the formula, obviously, A, for profit, but B, because, to some degree, he feels like a fraud deep down. The blow wouldn't just be him losing the upper hand, it would sting extra hard regard because of the fact that, in some regard, it would feel karmic, like Plankton was reclaiming something that belonged to him all along, leaving Eugene with a void of both his own sense of self as well as the one he conditionally borrows from Plankton so long as he can keep him at bay. It seems as though somewhere between the slamming of the door and the actual physical curation of the food, the line defining who intellectually owns the Krabby Patty secret formula was blurred, and the only way to truly write one's own name on it is to simply have it in your possession. There can only be one top restaurant owner in Bikini Bottom, and if either of them spend any waking moment not focused on making sure that it either remains or becomes them, neither of them feel like life really has any purpose because they've both devoted so much of their lives to this prospect alone. And we know that this dynamic would exist regardless of who was calling the shots. In The Algae's Always Greener, we see Plankton enter an alternate reality where he is the beneficiary of the secret formula, and he must deal with an unrelenting Eugene Krabs as he attempts to steal it in the same fashion. This goes to show that in spite of their rivalry, or perhaps even serving as a direct symptom to it, Plankton and Krabs are extremely similar. In Plankton's Regular, we see this dynamic even play out in the normal timeline. When Karen hires a local fish to act as a loyal customer to Plankton, Mr. Krabs tries to steal the recipe for Plankton's chum. This once again demonstrates that this rivalry between them has little, if anything, to do with actual financial gain. After all, this is literally one customer, one single fish who seems to prefer Plankton's entree over Eugene's, leading to a minuscule amount of money that likely wouldn't even put a lump in Mr. Krabs' wallet. In fact, the lengths to which he goes obsessing over swaying this one customer away from Plankton easily costs him more money than he would ever make off of one said customer. But he doesn't care. The thought of Plankton even having one individual find him more societally valuable than Eugene himself makes him sick to his stomach. Just one customer favoring the chum bucket completely erodes his self-worth. He almost just seems as distressed as he would be if he actually lost the secret formula. This ordeal exposes not just the fact that Krabs relies on an absolute unanimous consensus in order to maintain his superiority complex over Plankton, but that he values this superiority complex more than he values objective cash flow, which makes his relationship with his cash all the more bizarre. Chapter 5. The Addiction. Mr. Krabs loves money, but contrary to most people who love money, he doesn't love spending money. Most thorough estimates place Eugene's net worth at roughly $5 to $6 million, and considering his continued stream of revenue, he could easily afford to live far above the means that he presently decides to. For a multi-millionaire, Eugene leads an extremely frugal lifestyle. No extravagant boat collections, no luxurious appliances, and an extremely moderately sized house considering even his underpaid cashier has a more extravagant one. It really makes you wonder, what exactly does he need all this money for if he's hardly going to use any of it? The phrase wealth hoarding gets thrown around a lot, but I think this is an actual chronic case of it. Krabs intentionally sets up every aspect of his life to be as inexpensive as possible, from his skeletal crew to his own neglected self-preservation. Every move he makes must either be making him money or saving him money. It's precisely why he got so depressed when he sold the Krusty Krab and temporarily entered retirement. He impulsively accepted the large payday, but quickly realized that he's only fulfilled by continuous growth in sustained income. He interacts with money less like its currency and more akin to how a smoker interacts with nicotine. It doesn't matter how much he takes in, he is inevitably going to need another hit 2 hours later. An even more stark instance is the infamous scene in which he sells SpongeBob to the Flying Dutchman for 62 cents. He immediately accepts the pocket change in exchange for his most valuable employee without even blinking. He's so addicted to making money that upon presentation, it temporarily clouds his objective reasoning. In this scenario, he's quite literally giving away exponentially more money than he's accepting, and he doesn't realize it until moments later when Squidward snaps him out of his trance, and he finally interprets the real incoming repercussions of what he just did. Or when he misinterprets Sandy's proposition of having to pay in order to deal with the Alaskan bullworm, and he immediately begins foaming at the mouth, exclaiming that he'd rather the bullworm come in and eat every last one of his customers and both of his employees alive than pay money to eradicate the problem. Mr. Krabs is perpetually the stoner picking up the fallen marijuana nuggets from the dirty floor and shoving them in his bowl. He's the alcoholic puking out the liquor he's already consumed so he can drink more of it. This addiction is an abstract consequence of the emasculation of his lunchbox days, as well as the material consequence of his power trip. Mr. Krabs is addicted to having as much numerical value as possible. He sees every cent he attains as another validation of his own existence. After a childhood of poverty and powerlessness, the money is his objective proof that he has overcome it. He never wanted money to buy valuable things. He wanted money so that he could feel like a valuable thing. And it's gotten to a point where he needs to cling on to every last penny for dear life, because emotionally, it's all he has left. He's given up his humble origins, his youthful generosity, and his empathetic nature, his other life passions, his only true friendship, and even arguably he's strained his relationship with his own daughter in order to accumulate this wealth. To not have his millions would mean that he gave all of that up for nothing. If Mr. Krabs truly lost all of his money, he likely would not physically survive. In his mind, every dollar he spends chips away at his literal life source. He's put so much of his self-worth into his accumulated cash that he's created a sort of sentimental bond with it out of trauma and desperation. He is quite literally in love with his money. Chapter 6. Objectophilia. Krabs often interacts with the money he has attained as if he has some sort of interpersonal or sometimes even romantic connection to it. Hell, sometimes the dynamic is downright sexual. At one point, he even literally married an anthropomorphic wad of cash that he was unaware was just Plankton in disguise. Straight up was making out with it in the middle of a 5-star restaurant. Upon discovery of Plankton's deception, Krabs' reaction is genuinely devastated and emotional. He fully intended upon loving and building a life with this talking money, and he cries hysterically as he tries to piece himself back together. In fact, nearly every time we see Mr. Krabs brought to tears over the course of the series, it's because of money alone. Whether they be tears of joy because he has gained money, tears born of sheer awe at the beauty of money, or mournful tears at the discovery that he's lost money. When SpongeBob and Squidward are interrogating him because they suspect him of being a robot, the only way he's able to prove them wrong is by weeping with genuine heartache when they threaten to destroy his cash register. His connection to money oftentimes seems to transcend even practical reality. He quite literally seems to have a sixth sense for when he's losing money, and he especially seems to have a fixation specifically on milestone bills, typically ones that break him into a new figure of numerical wealth. He of course has the first dollar that he ever earned framed on his wall, and we see him get uniquely excited about his millionth dollar in the Season 3 episode Clams. In a rare moment of genuine bliss, he kicks all of the present customers out of the Krusty Krab to appreciate this bill properly. He decides to celebrate by taking Squidward and SpongeBob fishing on a boat. Side note, this episode proposes that there's not just beaches underwater, but an entire sea within the sea itself. How exactly this boat differs from regular driving boats, I'm also not 100% sure, but I digress. At one point, Krabs' dollar gets eaten by a clam, and in his quest to retrieve it, he starts having an actual manic episode, going so far as to use his employees as live bait in an attempt to lure the clam back. At one point, when they try to pass off a different dollar bill as his prized millionth, he is able to differentiate it by simply rubbing it on his crotch, and he intuitively knows that it's not the same bill. He almost seems to have built up a literal spiritual connection to his money. He fully understands the texture and aura of individual pressings. This is not simply greed. Mr. Krabs views money as his living companion, and would do virtually anything to keep said companion in his life. This presents an internal conflict when he finds himself in a situation where he actually needs to spend money in order to maintain or nourish an actual interpersonal relationship. Case in point, when he's attempting to court Mrs. Puff and he continuously forces SpongeBob to take his wallet to buy her gifts, unable to physically stomach spending the money himself. Here we see Eugene rapidly flip between objectives, part of him desperate to woo his new flame, and the other part just as desperate to maintain his net worth without disruption. or when he's in the process of planning Pearl's Sweet 16, and he similarly has SpongeBob take care of the birthday shopping. Krabs himself decides to skimp out on the actual party, even being cheap enough to hire Squidward throwing ass as entertainment. But when SpongeBob unveils an extremely pricey collection of gifts Pearl wanted, including hiring the Bikini Bottom equivalent of One Direction, he isn't fully upset. In fact, he partially feels relieved that his daughter is elated. There truly is a vein in which Mr. Krabs wants to use his money to make the people he loves and cares about happy, but at the same time, it feels like he's sacrificing a different relationship in order to get that feeling. And his brain never allows him to fully decide whether or not it's worth it. Spending money feels like cheating on it. And what's more is, as the series goes on and his income only continues to grow and continue to accelerate, he only grows more averse to spending any type of money. His commitment to saving the dollar is only solidified by the presence of more financial security. It's never expanded upon or even prone to renegotiation. Every cent is a promise of forever, and it's likely that one day, even his love for his own daughter will not be able to supersede it. The conclusion. As it stands, there's likely no light at the end of the tunnel for Eugene H. Krabs. His mentality is completely fried from years of self-denigration and erasure in the name of branding. From the empire, to the image, to the income, Mr. Krabs has fully committed to a life of shallow hierarchy and conditional status. A never-ending loop of proving himself to himself, rectifying scars of his past that only he remembers the existence of. Each dollar acting as yet another band-aid on a perpetually spurting bullet wound. To undo his miseducation would be to undo his perception of reality. The path to healing at this point might even just be more detrimental than the continued psychological solace and vacuous wealth accumulation itself. After all, Eugene is a boomer, born of a different era, a product of an environment that none of us could truly understand. As a boy, he had no forum to go on and vent his frustrations to, no Reddit post from 7 years ago to give him advice on how to deal with the many plights of his existence. He likely didn't even have a present enough father figure to properly model himself after, and the men he did look up to all but subscribed to a similar playbook of greed and deception. Perhaps he even was predilected to this lifestyle. After all, the DNA of countless generations of skeevy piracy resides beneath the skin inside of his exoskeleton. But regardless of whether his upbringing or his epigenetics are to blame, it changes nothing of the effects of what he's done. His reasonings for becoming the monster he became are completely arbitrary. The real physical, emotional, and psychological damage he has enacted directly upon others in his quest for what he perceives to be self-preservation, it's completely inexcusable, and it could never be retracted. I suppose all that there's left to ponder is what we can take from his story. I suppose we could take Eugene Krabs as a cautionary tale to remind us that material is simply material, currency is simply currency, and respect is simply respect. It truly doesn't matter how much you have of any of it if it costed the essence of your being to attain it. You will never truly possess it. The unsavory caricature of who you once were is the only entity that ever might. That young boy who once stuck up for his disenfranchised best friend, the one who stood firm in the face of his bullies, the one who was grateful and kind and courteous. He doesn't exist anymore. Merely the hollow shell that spent his entire life attempting to appease the very same people who degraded him.